welcome to today's episode of Stand Up, which welcomes the great Tim Wise for the second week in a row, and Andrea Chalupa, who is co-host of Gaslit Nation and the screenwriter of Mr. Jones, and journalist and amazing guest talking about Ukraine, where she knows a lot about because she's from there. Two great guests joining me on today's episode. Had to do the hangout on Wednesday instead of Thursday because of a whole bunch of things. I had to drive my daughters up to meet my parents, and then I'm going skiing with two of my buddies from high school, and so unable to get all the bells and whistles on, but I'm very excited about both of my guests joining me today and the hangout. A lot of fun at the hangout. Over 40 people, subscribers showing up. Joe Liotta showed up at my house today and brought me a bottle of whiskey and a Buckets and Boards t-shirt from our friend Gareth Severs group, which was awesome. Great to see you, Joe. Great to see everybody at the hangout. And now it's time to get to the interviews. Let's just do it, shall we? Coming up, the great Tim Wise. But first, I've got writer, journalist, co-host of Gaslit Nation, expert on Ukraine and Russia, and producer and screenwriter of the great film Mr. Jones from 2019, Andrea Chalupa on Twitter. Here we go.
Yeah, I'm just going to get this out of my system. I'm super pissed. This is the worst thing one of the worst things that's ever happened in my life personally, and for the world order of what's to come. Like this is like a nuclear war level type event. And I'm not just saying that because of my history with Ukraine. I'm just saying that because it's just true. The facts on the ground bear it out. Like this is like a Pandora's box of nightmares that's being unleashed right now by an utter madman.
Do you want that on the record?
I mean, I'm happy to get out of. I just need to get out of my system because that's. But yeah, I can say that in so many words for sure in this interview.
Well, my first question was going to be like one of a more personal of nature. Most of us don't know anything about, we don't know anyone over there. You obviously have family and friends and colleagues. And so my question was going to be, how are you doing and how are you paying attention to what's happening there?
Well, I'm not doing well by any means. I think I've been in this mode of functioning through a lot of state terror, whether it was the, of course, election of Donald Trump in 2016 to Putin being emboldened throughout Trump's time in office and all the weakening of U.S. national security interests, all the corruption, all the terror that Trump inflicted on us all those years. This is a new level of that. It's so however you were feeling on election night in 2016, take that and times it by 10. And that's been the state I've been living in, watching what's happening to Ukraine. I of course have people that I care deeply about who are there. Hold on. Sorry. Yeah, so it's really hard. It's really hard. And I want to just tell the world, people who don't have any personal connection to a country like Ukraine, is that this is coming for you. This is coming for you next. And what I mean by that, it's very simple. Having a large-scale military war break out in the heart of Europe, in one of the largest countries in Europe, right on the border of the European Union. That is going to be a Pandora's box that is going to haunt us wherever you live for many years to come. It's not only the humanitarian crisis, the refugee crisis, it's going to be a hot war for a very long time for the simple fact that Putin, from all the reports that are coming out, from what we've seen with our own eyes, with his surreal fascist pageantry Security Council meeting just the other night, with his unhinged speech full of conspiracy theories, Putin has lost his mind. He's always been, according to Angela Merkel and anyone who's had to deal with him, on another planet. He's always been in his own reality. He believes his own propaganda. He's isolated. And with the coronavirus, he's become increasingly isolated. And he's determined to do this. The only person who is driving this war that is going to greatly destabilize the world as we know it and have severe repercussions for us for many years to come is one single man, one dictator. And everyone has to be perfectly clear about that. We saw with his top lieutenants in the Security Council meeting, their fear of him, their cracked composure. Putin's spy chief, that's the head of the Russian CIA, Putin's spy chief was stuttering, couldn't get his lines right in this pre-taped fashion pageantry. They know what's to come. They know that this does not make sense. There's been cracks throughout Russian society of thousands of Russians across society protesting this through written statements and letters, and spelling out what a devastation this is going to be for the Russian people and for the Ukrainian people and for Russia's economy and the world as we know it.
Well, I appreciate that response and overview of all of it. I want to ask you a few specific questions. First, do you hold out any hope that the response from the rest of the world in terms of sanctions and canceling the Nord Stream pipeline and any other thing that can happen that we've seen happen as a reaction, do you hold out any hope that it doesn't get far worse into the kind of hot war that you're talking about, taking Kyiv and just thousands of casualties?
Well, people have to keep in mind that the edge of Ukraine, the far eastern edge of Ukraine that Putin is currently occupying, that he officially came out and said, we're going to make these already Russian-occupied areas independent republics, the Luhansk People's Republic, the Donetsk People's Republic. I want to start calling DeSantis's Florida the Florida People's Republic, because with his anti-gay laws, like Putin had his own anti-gay laws, so Florida could be the next People's Republic.
Oh, great!
So the far eastern edge that Putin has already occupied, it is surrounded by all these major cities, including Kharkiv, which is a vibrant university city. We filmed some of Mr. Jones there, my film about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine. Kharkiv is a vibrant, beautiful, culturally rich city, a lot of interesting restaurants, a lot of young people. These are all Russian-speaking Ukrainian cities that see themselves as proudly Ukrainian. And so if people are going to comfort themselves that Putin just is going to go in and take more of eastern Ukraine, that's going to be a bloodbath. That's going to be a lot of disrupted lives, a lot of disrupted potential. And keep in mind that the areas on the far eastern edge of Ukraine that Putin has already occupied are Orwellian Mad Max wastelands. He turned a art institute in Donetsk, Ukraine, into a sadistic Soviet-style prison where people were tortured like it was 1930s Stalin time. All right, so that's what awaits all those vibrant, proudly Ukrainian, full of young people with hopes and dreams, innovative entrepreneurs, hipsters that look like, anybody that you'd see on the street anywhere, and like in places like Brooklyn and LA. They're going to fall under the madness of a mass murdering terrorist dictator. So there's no comfort here. Like, he's made up his mind. It's very clear. This confirms that the U.S. intelligence all this time was correct. In terms of sanctions, I would love to applaud the European Union for sanctioning the entire Russian parliament, Putin's puppet parliament. That's just a rubber stamp for whatever Putin wants to do. I would like to applaud the European Union for finally sanctioning some of Putin's top propagandists. But the reality is they should have been doing this years ago. And the fact that they didn't is what also led us here.
So you don't think that these sanctions now, which we've seen, by the way, your Twitter feed, it was just fascinating because of whose stuff you're sharing. And it's really great. If people aren't following Andrea, you should right now, because I always learn so much. Andrea Chalupa on Twitter. And I feel like there's some pretty interesting developments that, as you're saying, and many others are saying, too late. It's not enough, but at least it's something. And it does seem bold. You see Asian countries, Taiwan and Japan, sanctioning on technology that Russia needs badly. Obviously, we mentioned energy issues, the pipeline, but now sanctions to apparently the children of the oligarchs and the oligarchs themselves. It seems like these types of sanctions are different. People argue, obviously, when they've been effective in different countries or in Russia. But it does seem like the West and Asia, to some extent, are going further than they have before. But I don't know the history.
Yeah, no, it's finally the Ivanka Trumps and the Jared Kushners of Russia are finally getting sanctioned, which is a good thing. And there's a lot more where that came from. There's a lot of children that are benefiting from this criminal regime. And what needs to happen is that. So here's the dynamic. Putin's corrupt court oligarchs, they steal their money from Russia and then they hide it abroad. Right. And they buy their families fancy penthouses in Paris and London, and they buy their beachside mansions in the south of France. They park their yachts, or they get their yachts built in Germany and then park them there. Not in Germany, but they get their yachts built in Germany, and they take advantage of their vacation homes across Italy. So the European Union has been a playground of Putin's court of oligarchs for many years now, and their children go to universities across Europe. Their mistresses get houses and apartments across Europe. So what needs to happen immediately, and what of course should have happened a long time ago, and what Ukrainians on the front lines of this war are calling for, they're saying you need to keep these corrupt Russian criminals trapped inside the Russia that they're destroying with their corruption. Do not allow them to have residency visas wherever they are. Seize their properties wherever they are across the EU. Do not allow their children to go to any European universities. Right. And to add to that, cultural institutions, including museums and universities across the European Union and the United States and Canada and elsewhere, should be forbidden as part of these sanction packages from taking any donations from Russian proxies in any form, because you have these Russian oligarchs that try to come over. They try to get whatever visa they need to keep, to get a foot in the door and stay. And they try to rebrand themselves like Roman Abramovich did in the UK, the Chelsea Football Club owner. They try to rebrand themselves as very British, right? Or they're hoping to become American. Deripaska, one of Putin's top oligarchs, the Russian thug that won the aluminum wars in the car bomb 1990s. They were called the aluminum wars because there was an actual body count, and he made his fortune that way. He owns a massive, massive company called Rusal that tried to do business with Mitch McConnell's Kentucky. Deripaska's been trying to get a foothold into America for a very long time now. He's welcomed in the UK. He's allowed in the UK. In America, he's been persona non grata. That started to change. The door started opening for him under Trump, where Mitch McConnell and Trump and others try to roll back sanctions for Deripaska, right? So we have to stop normalizing them. We have to stop depending on their money. The Democratic Party is the most sane party in the United States right now when it comes to standing up to Putin's aggression. The Republican Party is in crisis. Yeah. They're split over this. So the Democratic Party must show leadership by saying we will not allow any of our members to accept any donations from any Russian oligarchs or their proxies. Anybody who has close ties to the Kremlin or Kremlin proxies or Russian proxies that are a little too close for comfort. They have to act in an abundance of caution now. And that's really how resistance to Putin's aggression needs to be waged now. It can't be Ukrainians giving up their lives, being cannon fodder to Putin's war. The West needs to make sacrifices too by weaning themselves off of Kremlin corruption.
All really important, great points. Just sticking with the domestic politics, I want to just hear how you describe today's Republican Party, which I think is heavily influenced by right-wing media, from Tucker Carlson to several others who are now kind of Russian apologists and supporters of authoritarian regimes around the world. So I feel like they kind of wag the dog there. But I want to know what your thoughts are on today's Republican Party, which used to obviously be all the way up to Mitt Romney, very concerned about Russian aggression.
I think there are several members of the Republican Party, including mouthpieces of Republican Party propaganda, that should be investigated for whether they've been bought off Putin has bragged about the ability to buy off anybody in Europe and America. And so when you have Tucker Carlson spouting off Kremlin talking points to the point where he's defending Putin's very dear friend in Ukraine, known as the Dark Prince, and this is a Ukrainian oligarch by the name of Medvedchuk. Putin is the godfather to one of Medvedchuk's children. Medvedchuk owns pro-Kremlin media in Ukraine. He had his media stations, his media empire shut down. He's been under house arrest. He has, for being a traitor. This was something that Zelensky, the current president, did in this aggressive campaign against these Kremlin mouthpieces, these pro-Kremlin oligarchs. Some say it, of course, has gone too far because if you look objectively at it, he's basically going after oligarchs who are critics of him. He's cleaning house that way. But it has been helpful, ironically, to Ukraine's overall fight against corruption. There's no tears over Medvedchuk being forced in house arrest. Like, he's an enemy of the people in Ukraine. He's been considered a long-time problem inside that country. Democracy reformers, anti-corruption activists have wanted him to be brought to some sort of justice and oligarchs like him to be reined in. So what Zelensky is doing, even if it started off as some sort of personal motivation by Zelensky, it has a larger benefit for the Ukrainian people. This is a very obscure story inside Ukraine. Not many people are talking about it. Yet Tucker Carlson is from what I hear from a Ukrainian source, I have not watched this myself. But what I heard from a very alarmed source in Ukraine was I received a message saying, why is Tucker Carlson defending Medvedchuk? Where would he get those talking points from? So that's something that if he is indeed doing that, that's a pretty specific pro-Kremlin talking point. So you have to wonder who is feeding him that. And we also have to keep an eye on the fact that Paul Manafort, Putin's longtime operative inside Ukraine, he's going on Sean Hannity trying to paint himself as a political prisoner for being investigated by and being indicted by Robert Mueller's Russia investigation, right? He's gaslighting the American public. He was given a blood money book deal by an American publisher to launder his reputation and try to spin some pro-Kremlin narrative, painting himself as a victim, when the reality is that Paul Manafort is extremely dangerous. Paul Manafort is somebody that raked in blood money for years, helping bring Yanukovych, Putin's Trump puppet, to power.
Right.
And Yanukovych, while being advised by Paul Manafort, turned into a dictator against the Ukrainian people. He hastily passed, he had his puppets in parliament hastily pass these so-called dictator laws to try to save himself and stay in power when the people were starting to rise up against him. Paul Manafort was advising Yanukovych throughout the entire time. Yanukovych was having his snipers fire on pro-democracy protesters in Kiev. So Paul Manafort is somebody who has made a fortune off of blood money, off of furthering the interests of tyrants throughout, in various parts of the world, including Ukraine. So he's a very dangerous person.
Here is that what you're talking about with this guy Viktor Medvedchuk. In Tucker Carlson, in previous statements, Carlson has called Ukraine's elected president, Vladimir Zelensky, a, quote, dictator who's friends with everyone in Washington. So that's what Tucker Carlson says about the Ukrainian president. He sought to back his claims by pointing to the arrest of an opposition leader by Ukrainian law enforcement in the shuttering of a trio of TV channels accused of spreading pro-Russia propaganda. The individual he was referring to, Viktor Medvedchuk, is reportedly a close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin's and is the head of Ukraine's opposition platform for life. You're telling me he's not only a close ally, he's his godfather of his kid or something?
They're like this.
Huh.
They're family. They're brothers.
You'd think they would have put that in this story, but anyway. That's crazy. But the fact that Tucker Carlson is digging deep into the story there and wherever he's getting this information,
right,
and touting whether he's somehow being influenced by somebody sending him this points, or he's digging it up. The bottom line is he's supporting criminals versus authoritarians and autocrats versus folks who are in support of democracy, if I have that right.
Absolutely. And just to fact check Tucker Carlson there, Zelensky was democratically elected
right.
By a massive majority of people. He, before becoming president, he had a long career as a stand-up comedian. He had a popular TV show where he played this lovable teacher who goes viral by ranting against corruption in Ukraine. And that pushes him into this role of becoming president of Ukraine. Wow. And he just played this everyday guy forced to become president of Ukraine, and and all the adventures that, of course, ensue from there. So, and that show is called Servant of the People, and his party is called Servant of the People. And he brought a lot of young people into that party when he ran for office. And certainly he's not perfect by any means. He has made some bold moves against corruption generally. Ukraine is in a black hole of corruption, certainly, but it has made massive improvements, certainly from where it was under Yanukovych. And one thing people have to keep in mind, that independent of Zelensky's government, independent of the government, you have a robust, creative, and innovative civic society and nucleus of all these hugely impressive independent investigative journalists who are doing the Lord's work, risking their lives, risking their families' lives, doing dangerous investigations against corruption in Ukraine and across the region, including helping journalists and newsrooms around the world with that research and sources. Well, so we need to keep Ukraine alive to preserve all that because it benefits the world.
I so appreciate your time, Andrea, and my heart goes out to you. I know you're obviously feeling this so personally and differently, and I do appreciate your time talking to me about it all, because I thought your point of view and your voice would be as it has been and really resonate with folks listening. I can't thank you enough. Keep up the good work with Sarah. Tell her I said hi in Gaslit Nation, and I'll keep following everything you're saying and doing. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Andrea Chalupa. What a sobering conversation with her. You okay after hearing that? I had to take a walk after that conversation. That was tough, but I really appreciate her and everything that she had to share with us. I learned so much from talking to her. Hopefully you do as well. Go let her know you heard her here at Andrea Chalupa and listen to her podcast, Gaslit Nation, that she co-hosts with my friend Sarah Kendzior. All right. Now time to get to another great guest. Everybody knows our friend Tim Wise. He is an author, an anti-racist author and speaker. You should read all of his pieces at Medium, support him on Patreon, subscribe on Twitter at Tim Jacob Wise. And guess what? A new jingle for Tim. I teased the guys the last time Tim was on. I said, I bet you somebody will write a jingle. And Phil Round came through for another jingle. Very, very excited to play this for Tim for the first time. We challenged you guys last time. Phil Round showed up, and here is the debut of the Tim Wise opening song. It's like a minute long. Tim loved it. Here we go from Phil Round, philroundmusic.com in Wyoming. The great Phil Round introduces us to Tim Wise. All right, so Tim Wise joining me, and wow, I'm very excited to announce there's a jingle that has been written for you, a tribute to you. It's a minute long, Tim. It's from the great Phil Round, who's a big fan of yours, and I'm going to debut it right now. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Here we go.
Tim J. Wise, he always tries to show how things ain't fair. Speaks truth, educates youth, argue if you dare. Race is a lie, makes some folks high to sink so low. Strange fruit is never in season, no rhyme, no reason, no place to go. Just open your eyes. All you girls and guys, hear the words of Tim J. Wise.
Always important to get the J in there. Very important. Very important.
He got the J in there. Phil Round, everybody. Tim, what do you say?
I love it. And I appreciate Phil responding to the challenge that we issued for that to happen.
Right.
I thought you were joking, but man, he did not waste time with
that. He turned it right around, and he is Phil Round, and that was great. I'm very excited that we got the jingle for you. You deserve many more. You are on the road, and I like when you're on the road because we get your reactions on Twitter from public behavior.
Yeah.
And you had a great observation about a certain type of face covering that a certain type of guy. What happened? Who did you see, and why did you react so negatively to this man?
We are now in the third year of this pandemic, and apparently a couple people still don't know, and I'm being sarcastic when I say this because they sure as hell do know, that you need to pull the mask over your nose. Under your nose doesn't do any good. On your chin doesn't do any good. So that's number one. You've had 2.5 years to learn that. So if you don't get that right, it tells me that you're trying to troll us all publicly. But the better one are the guys that wear the gaiters, right? Which are those things, for those who don't know, that you like pull up from. It makes you think you look like a ninja, but you just look like an idiot. You look like an idiot, and you pull it up and you put it over your face. And the best ones, though, are the ones that are camouflage. And I see those all the time. And I don't think it's just the Nashville airport. I think that's everywhere. These guys are wearing these camo gaiters. And if you're still wearing a camo gaiter, and none of these guys look like they served a day in the military other than on Call of Duty last night when they were staying up eating Hot Pockets. And so they've got these gaiters on, which are basically, in my estimation, a way of saying, I ain't going to wear no diaper on my face. And that's what a mask makes it look like, is I got a diaper on my face. But I'm going to be a badass and wear this gaiter like I wore it on the bridge in Fallujah. And they haven't been in Fallujah. They don't know how to spell Fallujah. They couldn't find Fallujah on a map. If it was marked.
The last action he saw was falling out of his tree stand.
Yes, exactly right. Falling out of the tree stand would be at best what this guy's ever done. But I see them all the time. And it's these guys that are just trying to just be assholes for the sake of being assholes. And it never ceases to amaze me. I don't travel a lot, in the days of COVID. I haven't done a lot of road gigs, but when I do get out here, it's just like, it is rather amazing to see the kind of ways that people are still just trying to grab their balls and say, look at me. When
I see that kind of overt virtue signaling, that over masculinity, you've written so much about this. We talked about it last time, the toxic masculinity, whatever you want to call it. I do a little thing in my own head where I decide they're just afraid that they're attracted sexually to men. And then I just trick myself into thinking that that's what the deal is. And then I laugh. And I laugh in my head. I'm like, that guy really is just...
Oh, I laugh too, but then when they're like right next to you breathing on you, then you have to just hold your breath for an hour,
I just did laugh in my head while holding my breath. You're also holding your breath because they're rolling coal at you when they're in the pickup truck.
Because that's another, and I think we need to make sure we popularize a term that isn't. We could call it right-wing virtue signaling. I prefer to call it vice signaling. Right? It's like I'm going to signal all my vices to you. Noah Berlatsky uses that term, and I sort of stole it from him. But yeah, it's you're signaling your vice, and your vice is polluting the environment. So watch me roll coal on some hippies on bicycles or whatever,
right?
Because you can't do this in your Prius, right? And wearing these stupid ass gaiters, and it's very insecure masculinity when you feel you need. Because if you really feel like a mask is a diaper on your face, and you just think like that doctor is doing open heart surgery. Boy, he sure is
right. Well, it's also just whatever the idea, any kind of mask, an N95, whatever mask it is. It's the idea that they are following orders from the government that they hate so much.
Right.
Too. So it's like less so when you're
people who then tell all the black folks, if y'all would just comply with what the government agents with the badges and the guns tell you to do, you'd be all right. I mean, they do like compliance from certain people. They like compliance from their women. They like compliance from their children. They like compliance from black and brown people. They like compliance from Muslim folk. They like compliance from, the other, but they just don't want to comply with shit. It's the mentality of a 7 or 8 year old child who was arrested in their development somewhere around that age and just hasn't progressed to the level of a functioning adult. And I say that with absolutely no psychology degree, but a few years of therapy. And I stayed in not a Holiday Inn, but a very nice lodge in northern Indiana last night.
Yes, I got to hear about it before I hit record. Okay, so I also want to ask you your thoughts on the U.S. going to war with Ukraine from a standpoint of how some people in America are looking at the Russians, at Vladimir Putin, because you got some good stuff on Twitter about it. And if you've written about this, forgive me for missing it. But you say it's all about authoritarianism because that's what they want here. You write, praise for Putin by the right is about normalizing authoritarian rule, about downplaying the kinds of restrictions on basic liberties that they long for in the U.S. If they normalize Putin, they lower the threshold in America for accepting fascism. Love those tweets. What else can you add to that? Who are these people?
Yeah, the reason I wanted to say that, I feel like some of the analysis from my fellow people on the left is too simplistic in the sense that it's just like, oh, you're a shill of Putin, or you're a Russian puppet, or you are in love with Putin. I don't think that these guys actually love Putin. I don't think that that's it. I think that's an easy, simplistic way of looking at it. They like what Putin represents. This is, for Trump, this was what it was, right? Putin represents, as does Erdogan in Turkey and others, they represent a kind of authoritarian rule by the great leader who doesn't have to listen and abide by democratic norms and can just sort of kill his enemies, jail his enemies, do whatever he wants, shoot protesters, whatever. And I think that there is these right wingers in America have a Jones for authoritarianism that they have never had fully satisfied. That's why Trump was, wanted to send the military out to beat heads during the summer of 2020 and openly talked about and was amazed that he couldn't get the military to go along with that. Amazed that he couldn't get his leaders to go along with that. Amazed that anybody would question him on that. These are people who I think want to normalize authoritarian rule and essentially discredit small d democratic rule. And what better way to do that than to point to those countries that are currently being ruled by authoritarian autocratic dictators and say, well, look how efficiently they're running, and look at this and look at this. And of course, they're very selective in how they do it. China is a state like this, very authoritarian as well. And they bash that, but that has a lot to do with racialization, has a lot to do with the way we've always viewed China as opposed to other quote unquote European countries that are run by dictators. But ultimately, if they can normalize that kind of authoritarian behavior, they can then make it possible for a somewhat less authoritarian, somewhat less dictatorial, but nonetheless pseudo-fascist leader in America to come to prominence, or some might say to come to prominence again. I don't think they're just willing shills for Russia, or I don't think they necessarily love Putin. They wouldn't necessarily want to transplant Putin here, but they want us to be less resistant to the idea of the top-down autocratic leadership style that they found so gratifying in Donald Trump. And that's what I think we need to be focused on, not this idea that, it's just a bunch of lackeys of the KGB or something. That's just too simplistic.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I think some of them really do like Putin. He is the brand. He is a certain type of brand that they really like. I mean, you just talked for a couple minutes about this without even mentioning the tie that binds many of these guys from Hungary to Brazil to Russia, which is white supremacy, which is tied with Christianity, because they certainly don't like even though plenty of Muslim men are horribly patriotic, patriarchal, sexist bastards, that they're still Muslim. And so there's a white Christian brand to it that it would seem that white, Christian Americans look at and go, well, what's wrong with him? And then in the meantime, Tucker Carlson's selling him every night. He's pretty much selling him.
Like I said on Twitter, Putin
he's selling him like a Swanson frozen dinner.
Yes, no, he is Putin is definitely Viagra for Tucker, no question about that. But
yes, saw that tweet.
What I'm saying is it's exactly what you just said. It's what Putin represents a certain kind of masculinity, represents a certain kind of political authoritarian that they like, and also harkens back to this notion of this greater sort of white, or sort of orthodox traditional Europe. And so whether it's there, whether it's in Hungary, whether it is anywhere in Europe, or whether it's in Brazil, which is a racially very divided country with a very interesting racialized history that people don't often associate with white supremacy the same way, but they really should. And so when you think about those sort of strongman leaders, there's absolutely a racial component, a gender component, a political component to it. When I say that they don't necessarily love Putin, I mean, they do, but it's what he represents. They don't want Putin here. They don't want Bolsonaro here. They don't want Erdogan here. What they want is an American version of that, right, with all of the bells and whistles that come with it. And they have it, or they want to make more of that. Ron DeSantis does not really, I mean, the hair alone sort of disqualifies Ron DeSantis from being the heir apparent to that. So they're going to have to work a little harder.
Yeah, it's weird. There's always the weird thing that, you know, Putin projects this kind of fake masculinity, this fake strength, or maybe it's real strength. I don't know. He's a killer, however you want to define strength. Right. But then you got Trump over here that has a lot of similarities, but he's orange and real weird looking. And even Putin and other leaders are like, this fucking guy is kind of weird, like anybody who's ever met Trump. But why don't you and I and other thoughtful men try to fight that with a more mindful masculinity? Why don't you commit now on my podcast to posing shirtless on a horse next to me, shirtless on a horse, just the two of us?
I can't do that.
You don't care enough.
Right. No, it's not that I don't care enough. I care so much that I would not want to show my bare chest. You know, 30 years ago, I would have taken you up on that. maybe even 15 after like a week of not eating or something. But no, it's
been too long. Never shirtless on a horse. So let's talk a little bit about, I mean, there's so much more going on, but I do want to get your take on, I've asked, I think, one or two other people this, but you're going to have your own answer. The comparison between protest in general, you want to pick any era, any movement, any protest, from civil rights to environmental issues, to women's reproductive rights, to anti-abortion, to anti-government, or whatever you call what happened with the convoy and the truckers, to Occupy Wall Street. What's the difference in terms of what they wanted and what you saw coming out of that group of people, where the intersections lie, and then compared to some of the well-known peaceful resistance in the U.S. or elsewhere? What's the difference? And then what's the difference to the reaction to a whole bunch of truckers putting trucks on the bridge versus tents in a park in New York City or something?
Well, again, I mean, you know, so you think about Occupy, and whatever one thinks about the specifics and the mechanics of that movement, and about the naivete of some of their tactics and everything else. What were they fundamentally protesting? They were protesting fundamentally the vast and grotesque disparities of wealth in this country and on the planet, which immiserate millions, if not billions, of people and enrich a very few. Now, one can disagree about the specifics of how we go about that, but at the very least, I think there are lots of people, and not just people of the left, who can look at that and go, yeah, that's a problem. We have truckers in Canada who are upset about vaccine requirements. We have people who are upset about a public health mandate being placed upon, which 85% of the truckers in the country had no problem with. So this isn't, let's be clear, this isn't about truckers or bad, awful, nasty. I mean, no, 85% of the truckers were like, give me the damn, I'll do whatever. It's public health, dude. I got a job to do. Right. But then there's this 15% that are literally saying, this was fascinating to me, that the effect of America. I always knew we export a lot of our bullshit to people and good stuff too. But apparently there are people in Canada. I heard this yesterday. There are some of the supporters in Canada of the truckers who were saying that, like, their First Amendment is being violated. Like, your First Amendment is not the same as our. Y'all should look that up. Like, it's just not the same. So they're confused, horribly confused, and they're throwing a tantrum about a requirement being placed on them for purposes of public health. That is fundamentally different than protesting vast disparities of wealth. It is fundamentally different than protesting police brutality. It's even different than, you know, obviously I am in favor of reproductive freedom for women and for women to control their own bodily autonomy. But even those people that protest abortion, right? Even those people for whom that's their issue. Yeah. They are at least protesting what they consider to be the taking of life, right? This unjust.
It's a great point.
That's a real thing.
Yeah,
that's fundamentally
They're standing
different.
there with they're doing some pretty unsavory, but potentially illegal things in terms of where they might stand with their signs in relation to the clinic, or they always have those horrible pictures of fetuses and all that. But they aren't shutting down. You know, if they aren't shutting down traffic and preventing people from getting their job and so on. You can. I see what you're saying about the abortion issue.
At least look, if I were someone who believed what they believe, about when personhood begins, and what should and should not be the policies around reproduction and the right to abortion, then I would be protesting that too, because I would think, my God, this is a horrible, horrible injustice. I happen to be coming from a different place, but at least I get it. What is the injustice that these truckers are protesting? They are protesting a public health requirement that is no fundamentally different, really. I mean, in fact, it's more important than the requirement about the speed limit that they have to follow when they're in their damn trucks, how much they can put in their trucks to move at any given time. They go to the weigh stations. They've got to have a certain amount of weight that they've got to have. That's a rule. That's a government rule. You don't see them shutting down for that. You don't see them saying, I'm not wearing a seatbelt, Like they're not, they're not getting upset about that. But they're upset about this. This is a temper tantrum. And the worst part of it is the reaction here in the United States, where you have the same people who get angry at BLM protesters for blocking traffic for like 15 minutes, 10 or 15. And I'm not saying it's a good tactic to block traffic.
I don't think it is.
I don't think it's a helpful tactic for any movement, because I don't think anyone ever, road rage is bad enough. I cannot imagine anyone in a car coming upon a protest for any reason and being like, oh, cool, I'm going to have to sit here for an extra half hour while you get your protest. I don't think it's a good move. But here's the difference. In this country, when you block traffic for BLM, we have state legislatures passing laws saying, well, you can just run them over because you might be afraid it's a riot. Then the same people who defend that are the ones who are celebrating what these truckers in Canada are doing, even though it's disrupting supply chains, which are adding to the economic problems on both sides of that border and all throughout the world in some regards, but certainly in this hemisphere. You've got people that can't get parts to auto manufacturers. You've got all these things that in the midst of an economic crisis, inflation and tightening economy, and these same people that are arguing about it are celebrating something that's making it worse, which lets you know this is all this is trolling. This is just about owning Joe Biden. It's like, oh, well, if inflation goes up because of this, good, because then we can blame it on him. We'll celebrate the lawlessness of these people, even as we call for the literal death running over the lawlessness of these people. And they're doing the same thing, only the BLM protesters are doing it for a far shorter period of time and far less disruptively than the truckers have been.
Couple great pieces since we last talked, even though we talked last week. 13 questions for those who want to ban critical race theory, which I loved. And yesterday you posted, opting out of Black History Month lessons, that's white privilege. Black and brown folks don't get to pick and choose the things they're expected to learn. Guess why not? Tell me more about this one. Really good, as always, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, there was, and I'm in Indiana right now. There's been all this weird news out of Indiana lately. One of the stories, which came from a place called Nineveh, that sounds like something out of like a Chronicles of Narnia, only it's not, I don't know. It seems weird to me. But Nineveh, Indiana is a real place. Apparently, I'm sure it's lovely. Never been there. But there is an elementary school where the school counselor sent a letter around to parents that said, listen, February's here. It's Black History Month. I'm going to be going into the classrooms and speaking to your kids about equity, caring, and respect for others, or respect for difference, or understanding difference, something like that. Something very innocuous, right? Caring, equity, caring, and respect for difference. And the last paragraph says, but, if you don't, I'm paraphrasing, but this is basically it. If you don't want your kid, to be subjected to this, you can opt out. Just let me know. And I'm sitting there thinking, so you're saying three things. You're saying, one, that you're going to allow parents to opt their kid out of a Black History Month program. You're going to let your kid opt out of a program on caring, which is sort of a good thing to teach your third grader. And thirdly, you're going to let your kid opt out of a program that professional educators have decided is good for the purpose of education, because he mentioned in that letter that there is research, and there is, I've seen it, others have done that research, that shows that appreciation for diversity and difference actually does foster better learning outcomes for all kids. So in other words, this thing he's doing, it's not political, it's not ideological. He's not going to go in with the third graders and say, well, that Thomas Jefferson raped Sally Hemings. Like, he's not going to have that conversation with third graders. He's going in to have a very basic conversation about diversity, equity, and caring. And he's doing it in an age appropriate way. And these parents are basically being allowed to opt out of it, even though the research says this has a valuable, legitimate educational purpose. What other area Do we allow parents to do that? I wish that my mother could have written a letter to the school that said, you know what, my kid needs to opt out of algebra.
Yeah.
Algebra and geometry are not working for him, and we see no purpose and no function. But that's not an option. The only areas that we allow these opt-outs are in areas where people get triggered around their political and their religious views. So we say, let's opt out of sex ed because I'm the one that wants to teach my child about where the babies come from, and only when I'm ready to tell them. And then we're going to opt out of anything involving LGBTQ folks, or we're going to opt out of anything involving race. In other words, it's a bunch of right-wing folks who want to be able to control their children because they view their children as property, not as free moral beings with the right to develop.
Which you have a great piece explaining the origins of that, by the way. Really important piece. I never ever thought about
area where anyone and black kids don't get to do that. LGBTQ kids don't get to come in and say, I want to opt out of all this like heteronormative material that we've been teaching us for the last ever. Like black people don't get to come in and be like, I know that we were going to talk about the founding fathers, but like so many of them owned people like me. I think we just should skip that. Like nobody would be taken seriously. No Muslim kid could come in and say like, I know we're getting to like the 9/11 portion of the history class. My mom says, let's skip it, and expect that to be done. And so this is the ultimate example, again, of fragility, of incredible whiteout snowflake behavior, but also the very privilege that these people deny.
Also, you mentioned Darien, is it Connecticut? Parents.
Darien, Connecticut, yes.
Darien, Connecticut, which you write, after all, is a place known for its racial homogeneity and close-mindedness. That Mame Dennis, the lead character in the film Anti-Mame, insisted her nephew never become an Aryan from Darien married to a girl with braces on her brains. Wait, what is that? Did I say Anti-Mamie? What is it?
It's Anti-Mame. Mame was a musical. Anti-Mame was the original, the film. And it's,
okay, go ahead.
It's a great classic film and great classic musical. And there is a line near the end where she's talking about her nephew and how she doesn't want him to become an Aryan from Darien married to a girl with braces on her brains. And, this was a reputation. I remember my father telling me stories about, because I've told you before, my father was a stand-up comic for most of his life. And he used to travel around New York and New Jersey and do a lot of clubs in the area. And he knew Connecticut really well. And he used to joke to me about an Aryan from Darien, because at one point I was dating a girl who was from Darien. I have a good friend who I went to college with who's from Darien, both of them very progressive. But they used to talk about how reactionary and how conservative it was. And so he's like, oh, my God, an Aryan from Darien. So I always thought about that. And then when I saw these parents, because there's a group in Darien, I think it's pronounced Darien. They're going to get mad at me if I get it wrong. Darien,
It's Darien.
Yeah, right. But this parents group in Darien has formed to oppose CRT, to oppose social emotional learning. Because why would we want that? Why would we want our learning to be?
Really? I haven't actually heard that anywhere. The social and emotional learning is one of the most important recent
right. But it's Marxism is what they think. They literally think it's some type of Marxist indoctrination. Social emotional learning is like just good learning. Like it's just what, every mainstream educator understands the value of this. And SEL is under attack, both in Darien and also a lot of other places that are banning CRT. Man. They're all sort of lumping it in together. And so this group, and again, the fact that this incredibly privileged community, incredibly homogenous community, incredibly reactionary community thinks that they're under attack from critical race theory. Stanford, Connecticut has got some folks doing this too. It's like, do y'all look around? Do you and then like Greenwich, Connecticut's got people like, really? Do y'all know where you live? Like, have you paid any attention?
Yeah, no, I mean, we're not quite as affluent as those towns, but there's certainly some of the folks are. And I'm not saying that the people that are showing up that we're opposing are necessarily, but they are still. We're all doing really well in terms of what we have. But you've said this over and over. And I just talked with Catherine Stewart about this. It's a persecution complex. They really feel like they're the ones who are being discriminated against at this point. And I just, I've talked about this with you before. It's really hard to confront and strategize around.
Well, and I think it's important, as much as I joke about it, I make fun of these people and we tee off on them. It's also important to note that there is a source for their sense of victimization. And the irony of that source is it's the very privilege and the system of inequality that set them up to expect total dominance, right? So if you are raised in an environment where you expect 100% or close to it of the pie, the idea of only having 70%, even though that's still the lion's share, even though you clearly still have plenty of opportunity and access, that diminution from 100 or 95 down to 70 feels like the wheels are coming off the bus. And so what we've done, and this is why I always say privilege and inequality is an issue that everyone ought to care about, because what it does to the top group or groups, because it does this to men when it comes to sex and gender, it does this with straight folks, it does it with people with money. When all of a sudden the normal routine of dominance or hegemonic control starts to slip a little bit, even though you're still doing all right, but it starts to slip relative to what you were promised, which was the moon, you start to think, oh my God, everything's going to shit. The wheels are coming off the bus. And so pluralism, sharing, let alone equality, starts to feel like oppression. And that's because you were set up with these expectations. I've talked to you before about this theory that was developed in the 60s after the riots and rebellions and uprisings of 65, 67, 68. A lot of people wondered, well, why did that happen then and not 55, 57, or 58? Because things were objectively worse. And the theory that sociologists developed was this thing called rising expectations, right? So if you're a group of people that have been shit on for forever and beaten down, and all of a sudden you see some reforms and they don't move fast enough, that's when the explosion happens, because now the frustration builds. Well, if that theory is true, hold that over here on one side. If that theory is true, and it's pretty clearly evident in countries, not just ours, then imagine what it is to have been promised the moon from the beginning, right? You didn't have rising expectations. You always had high expectations, and you had every reason to assume that they would be fulfilled. And then all of a sudden, something happened. You got laid off, the economy globalized, whatever, and you don't know how to cope with that. And so the only two options you have is you either lash out or you lash in. You lash out by blaming the immigrants. You lash out by blaming Black people. You lash out by blaming critical race theory or social emotional learning or LGBTQ folks or whatever, or you lash in with opioids and heavy drinking and suicide, all of which we've seen go up dramatically in white, middle class and working class communities. So this is the dysfunction of inequality. This is why at the end of the day, all this frustration, all this enemy, all this angst that these quote unquote victims, or at least they feel they're victims, that they're feeling, that is a function and a symptom of the very system that they are defending. Yeah. And so if they want to stop feeling that way, they have to fight to change that system. And then they could relax and join with the rest of us to build a better society.
So well said. Last question I got for you is just one specific story that I wanted to get you to weigh in. I saw you tweeting about this, and I finally read this story that I was just like looking away from. The headline reads, "Firefighter suspended after mocking 8-year-old Black girl killed by police on hot mic." After Pennsylvania firefighters were caught mocking an 8-year-old Black girl killed by police on a hot mic last month, some members of the department reportedly have been placed on administrative suspension. Your reaction to that was swift, which is they should be fired immediately. Not sure exactly. Well, they said a bunch of effing N-words down there. I mean, there's the details of this I don't fully understand, but man, if that headline
this child was killed. From what I understand, she wasn't the target of what the police action involved, but she was this, quote unquote collateral damage of something. I remembered the story a few days ago. Now I'm a little hazy on it, but this girl gets killed, purely innocent, and they're making fun of her name. They're using these references to the community from which she comes. And, these were, I think they're volunteer firefighters, which means they were getting paid too much, obviously, for what it is that they were doing. They all need to be, they need to be gone. No administrative suspension, no diversity training. I'm not a big fan of cancel culture in the broader society. I'm really not. But if you have a job that involves that level of responsibility, if you're a cop, if you're a firefighter, if you're a doctor, if you're a nurse, if you're a judge, if you're a DA, if you're in a position where you have the power of life and death, or you're a teacher where you have the sort of influence over children's minds, and you have that level of bigotry. I'm not talking about you voted for the guy that I didn't like, or you've got a different view on affirmative action, or you've got a different view, whatever. Like, we can have that discussion. But if you're going to use that kind of invective with regard to a child, you have no place in a position of authority at all. And I want you to lose your job, and I want you to lose your career. I don't want you to ever be able to find another job like that. It's one and done. And if we can't even say that, if we're saying, I'm not saying put him in jail, right? That would be true cancellation. But I'm saying, you don't have the right to be a firefighter, Joe. You don't have the right to be a firefighter, Bubba. You don't have the right to be whatever the hell you don't have that right. That is a privilege, and you have lost it. Good luck finding work. And I think they should be named. I hate that every time this happens, we don't get the names. Like they never name these individuals. Well, if they don't name them, how is the next fire department down the way going to know not to hire them?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's one of the most important points. All of that really, really important. Thank you, as always, my friend. I really appreciate it. Always learn so much and love having these conversations. Thank you, Tim Wise.
Thank you for having me.
Dude bats 1,000, always hits home runs every time. Love talking to him. Just the most consistent delivery every time that we speak. Tim Jacob Wise on Twitter. Get his books. Subscribe to his Medium page, his Patreon page as well. Tell him you heard him here on the show and support his work because we love Tim very much. And I love you very much. Again, sorry for slacking lately, going through a whole bunch of stuff and super busy and just haven't been able to do my normal robust news stuff. But every day I have 2 great conversations with people and share them with you. If you could support the show for as little as $5, it's just me and my solar-powered shed and my dog making it happen each and every day, and I cannot do it without your support. StandUpWithPete.com, StandUpWithPete.com. And now it's off to go skiing with my 2 best friends from growing up, Lewis and Chris. I can't wait to see you in the Adirondacks. I almost downgraded the mountain range, the Catskills. On my way, boys. Love you guys. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up.
You gotta stand up. That's right. We got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.